Hello, YouTube, and today I don't really have to do an intro this time. It's a sequel video. I don't have to explain the history with the series to try and have you empathize with me. I don't have to prove I know what I'm talking about with a bunch of experience that hardly really matters in the long run. I don't even have to tell you the title because I'm sure all of you can read. But even still, let's begin this review of Azure Striker Gunvolt 2. So, where do we leave off last in Gunvolt? Right. So then Jill gets shot, she fuses with the Muse, and then fuses with Gunvolt, and then they go and shoot Asimov. Having killed his father figure, Gunvolt leaves his old friends forever to go and make new friends, and continue to do the things he was always doing before, with his depression episode happening between games, so it's almost like nothing matters. The further I looked into the plot of these games, the angrier I got. But it's fine because the game hardly touches on these plot points anyway, so who cares? We open up this story at the headquarters of the Sumeragi group. After having their inner structure and main defense force gutted, the three top dogs have to reassess their priorities moving forward. Or they would if they weren't under a surprise attack from a surprise guest. The surprise attack is from one of their own airships that has been hijacked. Luckily for their sakes, more so the civilians down below, Gunvolt is on the scene. The Azure Striker and Muse are back in action. Our intro stage is simple once again. The game teaches you its basic mechanics of tag and zap. All of your old mechanics are back with no new additions to your basic toolkit. Evasion, dashing, wall kicking, and flash fielding are all intact. So intact that we can pay attention to the in-game dialogue that still has the same button settings, but a little extra for a later explanation. But more importantly, we get an in-game demonstration of the Muse mechanic this time. This is also still the same as the original, infinite jumping, air dashing, and EPing, which is good because someone is getting a little rowdy and trying to speed up the stage. Our intro boss is another giant robot that we kill in no time at all. This boss does however reinforce what your flash field is and isn't able to protect you from. Skills once again make a return and they work the same as they did in the last game, however this time you can set a shortcut to your X button. Shortcut button may vary on console preference. Meanwhile down below, someone else is on a hunt of their own. Copen arrives on the scene and needs to get on the out-of-control airship as well. It seems to be the location of his kidnapped twin sister, Mithril. It's French. Oh, God. He needs to find a way to get on the ship, and his comms command, Nori, will give him the fastest route there. Copen is our new playable character for this sequel. He shares similarities with Gunvolt, but his way of play is completely different. First off, his gun is way more powerful. But more importantly, he can naturally air dash and for a much longer distance. These dashes ricochet off hard surfaces from walls to ceilings to floors. This leads into his main gimmick and how he tags enemies himself. He dashes into them for a small amount of damage and then his shots home in on them. He also has Gunvolt's pre-evasion skill, but unlike Gunvolt's, his pre-evasion is based on his bullet meter. Copen's bullet meter manages his pre-evasion and his air dashes. They reload over time like Gunvolt's EP meter, and just like him, if you double tap down twice, he reloads them automatically. But unlike Gunvolt, he doesn't end up in a weakened state from running out of bullets. He also gains bullets after hitting any solid object or enemy. Also, if you recharge in the air, he will do a ground stomp that can deal damage. I wouldn't try it because it's not that strong and you just take contact damage if you don't kill with it. I don't have an example because I've learned my lesson. Walk forward a little bit and you'll run into your Potbit companion Lola, an AI program that takes care of Copen's armor, but more importantly, she controls his flash field and EX weapons. Copen's flash field is different than Gunvolt's because it reacts automatically, but it isn't tied to his bullet system like Pervasion is. It's tied to his EX weapon meter. The EX meter controls your EX weapons, such as Stellar Spark. Your EX weapons also gain homing properties when you tag enemies, and some even change their other properties as well. The drawback is that Copen's flash field only activates when he has full EX meter. In my opinion, all of these advantages give Copen an easier time throughout this game than Gunvolt. He can recharge his Pervasion at any time, and his high movement pretty much makes flash field irrelevant, and if you choose to be defensive, you don't even have to think about using your flash field at all. But overall consensus seems to be that his movements make up for his more ease of play, giving players easier access to the faster pace that they've always craved. But on with the level, we've been chased by this air gunner and it's about time we've dealt with it. One special move later, Copen witnesses Gunvolt's slow descent of the falling airship with the help of Jewel, and seeing it as a chance to keep it from crashing, Copen shoots it, diverting its path with a move that we don't get to use in this game. Luckily for Copen, Gunvolt managed to save the sister he was looking for, but unbeknownst to the both of them, they are ambushed by a few of the interlopers that caused this mess in the first place. A new atom called Tinjin, and a revived Zonda. With breasts? No, wait, there's that spike cock piece. Joel does her best to try and protect Gunvolt, but it seems her powers are shorting out, and Zonda takes this time to trap her in a mirror that Tinjin then breaks apart, collecting the broken pieces. Finally completing their true motive, Zonda reveals their true self, a little girl. An oracle of another adept group called Eden. Unlike Quill that only plans to stop the discrimination and abuse of adepts, Eden has a more drastic plan to make a utopia of only adepts. Zonda takes her leaves as Tinjin extends an inviting hand to Gunvolt that is promptly refused and leads to a boss fight. One boss fight later, we defeat Tinjin, who wasn't even at his full boss power because of some actually halfway decent plot reasons. Copen also manages to break free, and Lola manages to steal one of the mirror shards for herself, and Gunvolt is left to wallow in his own misery alone once again. Or is he? It seems that even broken to bits, a small piece of Joel is still with him but diminished in power, so our gameplay status quo is preserved, our bosses are set, and you are able to choose your character. We're picking Copen because there's still more plot here. God, is there more plot? We join Copen, who is trying to figure out how the mirror piece works, but gives up and decides to check on his sister. Mr. Michiru is a sickly girl who lost her voice from an operation she had years ago, and she spent a lot of her time with Lola while she was being created. This time, however, the two's meeting causes a transformation. Look, even more cute idol girls. Copen needed his own after all. Either way, it seems the return of the two causes Michiru to feel better, and Copen continues to try to find a correlation to everything. As for Gunvolt, he gets a new pair of clothes thanks to his text and comms guy, Xiao Wu, who also used to work for Quill, but now mostly helps Gunvolt on the side. And then there's Quinn, a completely normal girl. The two use her house as their home base. Why? Because, that's why. And the sad thing is, I'm not making a joke. The only other special thing about her is that she can communicate with Jewel, and the only other person that can do that is Gunvolt. With that out of the way, we've now reached our gameplay loop once again. Because this game is split between two characters, we're only presented 4 stages at first. For Gunvolt, we have a mysterious manor that is watched by the full moon, that's full of spikes, trapped iron maidens, and once again, zombies. There are the sewers where you have to worry about water levels so your flash field doesn't short you out. Then you have to watch out for not only water bullets, but torrents of whirlpools that impede your progress. Finally, another data facility, but this time the whole building is made of data itself. Cross over the screen like your Pac-Man and navigate new flash-filled puzzles while you try to get through this dizzying data store. On Copen's end, you make another run up the orbital elevator of Babel. The elevator at the bottom seems to be out of order, so we have to make our way up until we find a floor where it's working. We just have to deal with the enemies and hair as we make our way up. Then there's the Prism Highway. The road has been destroyed by crystals and we have to find the adept responsible. We just have to make sure our shots still aim true even when it's altered by the crystals, and chase down the boss with the help of Nori and her bike. Next up for Copen is the Isle of Dreams, or as I like to call it, the Dump. It's a robot scrapyard where you have to watch out for reanimating robots, falling garbage, grinders, and 2 boss fights. Both, however, share their 4th stage, the Frozen City, but before we get going, let's talk about our home base first. So home base for both characters is pretty much the same, and also pretty much the same as the last game. So no auto-saving, never forget, and if you do, save again. There's a really handy in-game explanation on the game mechanics and terms this time around. Mountable buttons are back once again. Would really like to have sound options, not gonna lie, but this is a port of a 3DS game, so I don't know how common that is. One great feature is the story mode setting. You can set your opacity clearly from here, and you can also set if you want the portraits and video on and off as well, too. Challenges are back once again, and while you still need to beat a stage first to unlock its specific ones, you don't have to select which ones you want to complete, and the game does the checking for you after every stage, so you just need to cash them in. You can once again change your loadouts, but that is different between both characters. The biggest difference gameplay wise is that you can change everything, including skills during the levels themselves for both characters this time around. Gunvolt still has all of his old equipment slots with one new one that I will be explaining later. For a more specific change, each pendant has its own provision amount that changes depending on which one you pick. As stated before, skills are still the same with the exception of the shortcut button. However, for Gunvolt, if you look through certain levels close enough, you might be able to find a special skill that doesn't use any meter. As for Copen, he only gets to have 2 special skills in the game, his attack skill and a heal skill that can only be used from the start menu. Copen's loadout, on the other hand, uses a completely different system altogether. He has a program system that uses subroutines to fill up a number of memory slots. Subroutines are varied from damage to defense to covering all of your bases and more. Your only problem comes from filling up too many at once. If you do that, you can cause bugs to appear. Bugs have effects that range from you doing less damage, you taking more damage, having some subroutines that you have installed not work, or at worst, you have just 1 HP, and it all seemingly happens at random. Both characters have a chance at gaining equipment with EXP gauges on them. Unlike the normal leveling system that levels you up anytime during gameplay, your items only level up at the end of stages. For Gunvolt, leveling up items mean that they become more effective, such as doing more damage or becoming more cost efficient, like your air dash taking up less EP to use. For Copen, it means that your routines will take up 1 less space in the memory slot. As stated before, the leveling system is still in this game. Gunvolt still gains skills and HP, while Copen gains HP and extra memory slots. Copen can also gain extra memory in some of the levels, just like the jewels you found in the first game. Gunvolt just finds cast deposits, so if you find one with him, check again with Copen and that's where it should be. We're finally back at the synth shop and it didn't get better. In fact, I think it got worse. It's the same as last time. If you're just playing through the game stage to stage, it's not useful. Unlike the last game where you had to incrementally make most of your items, this one gives you a more branching path approach. You see, when you make one item, you unlock a multitude of other items at once that can be made with the previous one. It feels like I should have more choice, but it feels a bit more restrictive than it should be. It doesn't help that the level up gear can't be used in making new ones as well, so I hardly get a feel for the first gear that I have before it asks me to make something else entirely. I feel like it's especially bad for Copen because you don't feel like you're being efficient when your memory isn't fully maxed out. It doesn't have any of the smaller gear that I need because I've already used them and turned them into something else. Sure, you can always go back and make more of them, but making 2 of the same gear for any reason feels like a waste. But they fixed it in the 3rd game, so my only critique is, boy, is it bad here. Back to the plot, the frozen city is just as the name implies, cold, slippery, and full of spikes. Wait, one interesting thing is that there are these little pods that you can attack and keep yourself from slipping on the ice for a little while. The second interesting thing is that you have a rival battle here. No real plot significance, so bop them, play the level a little bit more, and bop the boss and you're on your way. With these 4 levels down, the plot moves once again. I mean, it moved a little bit when you killed the first 3 of them, but it's the most nothing I've seen in a while. Oh man, the final boss is watching. Isn't she so cool by how steadfast she is in the face of danger? Either way, this means that Gunvolt has to head down to the highway and Copen heads down to the sewers. The reason is the same. Sister has been kidnapped once again. Oh man, typing this out makes me even more angrier than I was watching it. Anyway, 2 of the bosses you didn't kill in that run are the new ones that have now kidnapped her in the corresponding stories. One of them lets the other get away with the girl, and this becomes a singular boss stage. After they are defeated, however, we have to make our way into the enemy's headquarters, the Garden. But let's talk about special weapons first. I glazed over this in the review of the first game, but Gunvolt gets special weapons for defeating bosses. They are the same from the first game minus the secret one that makes it play more like classic Mega Man. All of your guns have different uses, from aligning them to hit enemies easier, to shooting through objects, to ricocheting from enemy to enemy. The thing was that in the past game, each gun had its own set number of tags. I normally used the Orochi for stages because it had 8 tags to use, and I used the Cerberus in its 3 tags for boss fights for its rate of fire. As stated before, in this game you gain a new tag slot in your loadout menu. This lets you set the number of tags you have no matter what gun you use in the game. The more tags you have, the less damage you do to enemies overall, and the less tags you have, vice versa. I think this is a pretty interesting way to keep all of the shot types viable, and an interesting way to pick which style of playthrough that you want to do. Do you want to go for as many points as you can with a bunch of tags, or kill as fast as you can with few? They're synth items, so it's not like you'd be able to make them anyway, so whatever. Copen, on the other hand, gains EX weapons. You pull a Mega Man and you gain the boss's septum of power to use with your EX meter. Find the boss's weakness, and their HP is shredded to pieces. With that final bit, we head to the garden where the difficulty finally starts to spike. And by that I mean there's a bunch of spikes in the first half, and a bunch of bottomless pits in the second. Garden 2 is interesting in that Gunvolt and Copen have different routes for the first half of the level, where Gunvolt has a flash field challenge that you can cheese by having a lot of tags, or spend too long on by forgetting how shutters work. One of these solutions leads to the other's problem, and I think you can figure out which is which. Copen, on the other hand, has to deal with more bottomless pits. Having essentially a jetpack does make this a bit more fair, but it's still a bit nerve-wracking. The second half is a gauntlet of enemies that the game tries to make you feel bad for, but then you remember how they were simping over getting a year's supply of one of their boss's hair, so I don't feel too bad about it. Also, the genocide thing, I guess. These last stages are where you fight the other 2 bosses you didn't get to fight during your character's run. And it's finally time. Once again, in Garden 3, do we have our boss rush. And this lasts us all the way up until the final boss herself, Zonda. Twice. Or 3 times. Well, there's just 2 boss fights. Even though she steals away our power of resurrection, she is easily defeated like everyone else. Not even a big final, "Oh no, you do not know what you've wrought, Gunvolt," but I can't believe I was defeated, Oni-san. I guess I can talk about the secret ending because Gunvolt 3 doesn't even have a release date. I don't want to pretend like anything in the story matters after all. To get the secret ending this time, all you have to do is beat the game with both characters once. Easy. Then go back and do the boss rush, and the 2's cliffhanger showdown turns into a boss fight where Lola and Jewel fuse with Mithril and power up whoever you're fighting against because you defeated them in the first round. After all the fighting is said and done, the girl called Mithril catches a case of plot amnesia, not remembering her being Copen's sister or the time she spent with Gunvolt as Jewel, and in the end both boys remove themselves from her life hoping she can find peace. If I was indifferent about the story in the first game, I actively don't like it here, and the main problem is that in doing these reviews, I look up stuff for them that we didn't get over here in the West, and none of the information I find is particularly good or compelling. There's a lot I want to say, but I'll boil it down to that all of the characters feel like action figures that are being smashed together to get to whatever downer ending they want to do. Quinn is the best example. She exists so Gunvolt can be the protagonist. Can any of you follow that line of thinking? Because even with context, I still can't. This is the bit where I say a lot. The series writer said that he couldn't envision Gunvolt as a hero after the events of the first game. In fact, he would become an enemy of Copen for the second game. You would unlock him later after fighting him for some reason. The series director wanted Gunvolt as the protagonist, and the only way the writer could make that happen was to have Quinn, a literal emotional support character, and that's all. At least characters like Nori and Xiao have a plot function. Quinn is here to fill Jewel's role because she's no longer real, but Jewel is still there, so it feels redundant. She is the one-dimensional character people think other multifaceted characters are. but everyone else is also kinda one-dimensional too. I'm not expecting much from the quirky bad guy squad. They're evil and I don't really care about their backstories that explain why they're evil. It's not compelling because all of them choose genocide as their main end goals. But it just sucks that even our 11-year-old final boss can't have a bigger picture than just mass murder. The previous big boss at least went with slavery with benefits, who was then superseded by a genocidal antagonist. And the fact that I had to say slavery with benefits is nuanced should tell you how bad our characters are, because they're nothing more than their end goals and one personality trait. And you know what, I'd be fine if our main characters also weren't awful. Gunvolt isn't enough of a character to be good or evil on his own values or volition. Copen is just a carbon copy of Gunvolt, but racist. Stoic, troubled protagonists who are grounded by their morality pets. But the thing that makes me the most upset is that there's enough writing in the overall scenario to make it good. Copen is someone who doesn't change at all in the whole game, and his ideals are only challenged in the secret ending. Instead of just fucking around the whole game with enemies that just prove his points right, you should bring in the fact that his dead father wasn't killed by Sumeragi, but in fact murdered during an inhumane experiment on an adept that just so happens to be Asimov. But that's not in the game, so who cares? Have him find out his sister is an adept earlier than the final boss. Have him just think about the things he's doing in at least half of the game. Gunvolt's story is just the first one again, but this time he's sad because his first waifu is a ghost, and Joel is sad because she doesn't have a physical body. Which is probably part of the reason to wanting to make him the antagonist, but that thought process seems equally shallow to me. But you know what, when Gunvolt 3 comes out, it's probably gonna do both. I'm calling it right now. In Gunvolt 3, Gunvolt is working with Sumeragi to take down Copen, who might be the third playable character in that game. I mean, 3 playable characters was another pitch for this game as well, that third character being Xiao, who is now just shady and sneaky with ulterior motives by the end of it all. The biggest problem is that there's so much writing in this series and none of it really relates back to the games or the characters themselves. It's all setting for the narrative and explains why characters are where they are, but hardly relates back to them in any way that matters. The overall aesthetic is still very good though. This game is very pretty. This time we get some new locations like a moonlit manor or a destroyed highway, but its industrious feel is still very heavy-handed. It does take place in the future after all, I guess. But levels like the data center and even the town feel like a nice change of pace from stages like Babel or the sewers, which are still very well done in their own right. Music is still very on point and a bit more upbeat than the last game, but that might just be the highway theme sticking out to me. The auto songs still get in the way and beat out everything else in this game, and you get another one to do different renditions for themes in this game. I think the difficulty has been risen from the first game in level layouts and traps that try to trip you up. They realized how easy Pervasion system has made it and decided to just amp up the number of bottomless pits, but luckily they saved most of them for the endgame. You can, however, decide to challenge yourself with one of the in-game items that makes spikes kill you in one hit. And now that we're near the end, I should actually talk about how I'm playing this game. As mentioned briefly, I am playing this on my Nintendo Switch, the Striker Pack, which includes both the first and the second game. That means all of the DLC and updates for the original 2 games have been packaged in as well. A Striker Pack has been made for the 3DS version as well, but this in the PS4 version has higher quality art CGs, and they run at a smooth 60 frames per second. As for the DLC that was added, they added audio lockets from the first game that play the songs from there, that also give you a boost to EXP and money when you hit 1,000 kudos. They also have remixed stages where you can fight bosses from the first game and super versions of the bosses of Gunvolt and Copen in this game. It also includes other speedrun and challenge modes with preset stipulations on them. If you're thinking about picking up a version of this game, pick up this one or the PS4 version. Either way, I think the whole pack is worth it. You get 2 fun games with a lot of replay value and extra modes. I didn't even talk about the Christmas mode in Gunvolt 1, where levels gain ice physics and you have to catch presents that only unlocks around the 25th. Gunvolt 2 is a great sequel in that it is just the first game, but bigger, better, and it has a whole new character added. I've been playing a striker packed version of this game for so long, I forgot that in the original release of 1, there weren't any separate kudos mode and you could only take one hit before everything reset. So this release is the real definitive way to play these games. I highly recommend it on gameplay alone, and if you don't care about the story, you can turn it off and it's not even there enough in the first place for it to matter. Hopefully for my timing's sake, we only have one more game in the overall Gunvolt franchise to get to, so until then, mata ao.